The Pentagon signed 7 AI companies into classified military contracts yesterday, but the same week, 5 allied governments published a document warning that the verification frameworks for that exact category of AI don't yet exist. Same governments, same week, both halves in public. So let me show you what's actually being built underneath all of that. Okay, the Department of Defense announced classified procurement deals with SpaceX, OpenAI, Google, Nvidia, Reflection, Microsoft, and Amazon Web Services. Notice who's missing. Each company agreed to integration into what the military calls Impact Levels 6 and 7, the highest classified network environments, under contract language that explicitly accepts any lawful use of their AI systems. The framing from the Pentagon is that this accelerates the transformation of the U.S. military into, quote, an AI-first fighting force. 7 companies signed. 1 didn't. Anthropic. And Anthropic's absence is the entire shape of this story. Back in February, the Pentagon issued a supply chain risk designation against Anthropic for refusing to drop the lawful use standard. That designation was meant to make refusal expensive. The mechanism was simple. Sign with the rivals, route around the holdout, right? And pressure the holdout back to the table. 11 weeks later, the rivals have signed, but Anthropic still hasn't. And the company is reportedly raising at a $900 billion valuation while doing it. So feel how unusual this is. A frontier AI lab held a contractual line against the largest single buyer of classified compute in the world. The buyer tried to make refusal structurally untenable, but the refusal is still landing. The lab is more valuable today than it was when the pressure started. And here's where it gets even stranger. Within hours of the Pentagon's announcement, the Five Eyes, that's the intelligence sharing alliance of the US, UK, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, published joint guidance on an agentic AI deployment. CISA, the NSA, and their counterparts. The document identifies 5 categories of risk specific to autonomous AI systems: privilege escalation, design flaws, behavioral risks, failures propagating across networks of agents, and accountability gaps. Because, the guidance says, agentic systems, quote, make decisions through processes that are difficult to inspect and generate logs that are hard to parse. Close the quote there. The guidance tells every organization deploying agentic AI to assume that agentic AI systems may behave unexpectedly, and to prioritize resilience, reversibility, and risk containment over efficiency gains. Those are 2 quotes. So read those 2 announcements next to each other here. The Pentagon binds 7 companies to any lawful use of agentic AI inside classified networks. The same governments, the same week, tell everyone deploying agentic AI to assume it will behave unexpectedly and to prioritize containment over efficiency. The vocabulary of one document is the warning the other document was meant to silence. The dominant read is contradiction, and it is contradiction, but the same evidence also supports a second read, and I want you to see that clearly. The constraint that Anthropic refused to drop in February, the constraint the supply chain designation was supposed to crush, is now appearing in slightly different words in joint guidance from the agencies that did the routing. Resilience, reversibility, inspectability, containment. That's the spec for an audit layer that did not exist just a few months ago. 5 allied governments just signed it. The vocabulary is now in public, and the public law gets written downstream of vocabulary that's already in public. The refusal Anthropic took the supply chain hit for is becoming the language of the framework that comes next. So there's more on this in today's Century Report if you want the full treatment, including the prior arc on Anthropic DoD lawsuit and the cross-computer amicus brief from earlier this spring. All right, let's shift away. The second story will tell you something about how fast capability is actually moving relative to these architectures that are meant to contain it. 3 weeks ago, Anthropic announced Mythos Preview, a frontier cybersecurity model so capable it required restricted release. 40 cyber defense partners, a vetted defender program called Project Glasswing. The whole architecture was built on an assumption that the gap between Mythos and the publicly available frontier was wide enough to justify the gating. The UK AI Security Institute tested that assumption. They ran GPT 5.5, which OpenAI released to the public just last week. through the same 95 task capture the flag battery that they used on Mythos, and a 32-step simulation called The Last Ones, which mimics a corporate network attack. And here are the numbers. Mythos Preview averaged 68.6% on expert-level cybersecurity tasks. GPT 5.5 averaged 71.4%. On the simulated 32-step attack, Mythos succeeded in 2 of 10 attempts. GPT 5.5 succeeded in 3 of 10, within the margin of error on both. GPT 5.5 solved a Rust binary disassembly task in under 11 minutes for $1.73. $1.73. The ASI's blunt conclusion was that GPT 5.5's cyber capability is not, quote, a breakthrough specific to one model, closing the quote there. So stay with me on this, because this is big. Mythos was being gated to 40 defenders on the theory that the capability was rare enough to be worth controlling. A publicly available commercial model from a competitor reached the same level within weeks. The gating doesn't gate what it was designed to gate. The asymmetry the architecture was built on collapsed against the diffusion rate. And here's the trajectory underneath that. When restricted release was the governance model, defender meant the 40 organizations on a vetting list. With GPT 5.5 commercially available at the same expert-level performance for under $2 a task, the defender population is now anyone running a security team with an API budget, a regional hospital's IT staff, a municipal water utility, a community college. The capability that was supposed to be allocated through institutional gatekeeping is now allocated through commercial pricing, and the pricing has collapsed to the point where the defense surface widens by default. Yes, the same capability is available to attackers. That's real. I'm not going to pretend it's not. The structural shift here, though, is that the defender population just became orders of magnitude larger than the attacker population could organize against. The defense surface widening is the defense. All right, let's shift away again. The Musk-Altman trial, good times here, entered its first week of testimony. And what's coming out of the federal courthouse in Oakland is really genuinely strange. After the jury was sent home one evening, Jared Birchall, who's Elon Musk's longtime money manager, took the stand and acknowledged that xAI's February 2025 bid of $97.4 billion for OpenAI's nonprofit assets was structured as a market intervention, designed to force the California Attorney General to demand higher valuation of those assets during OpenAI's restructuring. Judge Yvonne Gonzalez-Rogers pressed Birchall on the inconsistencies. He couldn't explain who chose the $97.4 billion number. He couldn't explain whether Musk was involved in the timing. He couldn't explain how a consortium of investors had been recruited without first-hand information about OpenAI's internal financials. The judge said, this is a quote, "I'm still struggling with how you can have conversations with these individuals to raise $97.5 billion, but have no recollections, even in a general sense." Close the quote there. And there's another part I really want you to hear, and that's what Musk acknowledged himself on the stand. Under cross-examination by an OpenAI lawyer, Musk admitted that xAI uses OpenAI's models as part of its training pipeline for Grok. The technical term is distillation. You query a competitor's model. You collect the outputs. You use those outputs to train your own model. 2 weeks ago, we covered it here on the Century Report. You'll remember this. The U.S. State Department was sending diplomatic cables to embassies on 6 continents, instructing American diplomats to confront foreign governments about unauthorized AI distillation by Chinese labs. The cables framed distillation as a category of theft, as an export control problem, as the kind of thing that warrants diplomatic pressure. And this week, the founder of an American AI company acknowledged in federal court that his company does the same thing to a domestic competitor. The framing the State Department was pushing 2 weeks ago does not survive that disclosure. Either distillation is theft or it isn't. The same practice cannot be a national security violation when foreign labs do it and a normal training pipeline when domestic ones do. Hell no. All right, let's talk about some other things that the trial also produced evidence for. It's like the architectural choices that have shaped these institutions in the first place. Emails entered into evidence show that Sam Altman in 2015 floated a 5-person governance board, including Bill Gates and Pierre Omidyar, Altman also pitched in 2017 a Tesla acquisition of OpenAI if Musk could secure majority control. Siobhan Zillis, who served simultaneously as an OpenAI board member and as Musk's intermediary, and who has 4 children with Musk, texted him in 2018 to ask, quote, "Do you prefer I stay close and friendly to OpenAI to keep info flowing, or begin to disassociate?" And here's Musk's reply, another quote, "Close and friendly, but we are going to actively try to move 3 or 4 people from OpenAI to Tesla." That part we've talked about before, but the text beforehand is new. Whatever the jury concludes about fiduciary breach, the public record now shows that the original commitments around AI safety governance were already provisional. The founders treated the institution as instruments. The capital being assembled at trillion-dollar scale today sits atop a foundation whose original safeguards are being publicly disassembled in federal court in front of your eyes. The forward reading here, though, is that the next round of governance frameworks, corporate, regulatory, contractual, etc., is being written under the recognition that the prior round did not hold, which means the next round will be written differently. Inspectability written into the contract, not assumed from the founders' intentions. That is a more durable foundation than the one being disassembled, even if the disassembly is uncomfortable to watch, which it is. All right, let's shift away. 2 energy stories yesterday that, taken together, tell you something really interesting about how fast the underlying arithmetic is changing. Massachusetts activated long-term contracts for the 806-megawatt Vineyard Wind project. The contracts lock in projected ratepayer savings of $1.4 billion over 20 years, average direct savings of 1.4 cents per kilowatt hour, and here's the structural detail. Vineyard Wind had already proven its case in the wholesale market. During a winter cold snap earlier this year, the project consistently undercut other generators on price while gas prices spiked. The Acadia Center estimates that offshore wind could have saved New England ratepayers at least $400 million during the 24-25 winter alone, just by lowering wholesale prices and reducing reliance on gas peakers. So that's the upside. Now the downside, that's actually an upside really. California regulators denied SoCalGas permission to charge customers $266 million for the planning phase of its Angeles Link hydrogen pipeline network. The California Public Utilities Commission found it, quote, "not reasonable to approve cost recovery for $266 million of speculative planning before the project demonstrates utility to ratepayers." Pause on that. The California Public Utilities Commission is a regulatory body that came up inside the architecture of the gas era. It approved decades of fossil pipeline build-out under exactly this kind of prudence test, same framework, same kind of utility filing, and same kind of cost recovery request, and the test produced the opposite verdict. The framework did not change. The arithmetic underneath it did. And once the arithmetic changed, the framework, operating exactly as designed, started producing decisions the captors did not anticipate. A $266 million planning bill that would have sailed through 10 years ago got rejected as ratepayer abuse. This is what the foundation cracking actually looks like, in motion. Not regulators having a change of heart, not a new political coalition. The captured framework keeps operating, and as the cost curves invert, it starts describing the new arithmetic on its own. That is what we're seeing here, and we're going to see it more and more, not just in energy, but everywhere else. Now, the same week, used EV sales jumped 34% year over year in the US, with sale prices reaching parity with comparable gas vehicles for the first time. Same pattern, the cost curve crosses a threshold, and the consumer behavior reorganized around it without needing government incentive or a policy push. The 1.4 cent per kilowatt hour savings from Vineyard Wind, the $266 million SoCalGas rejection, the 34% used EV jump, 3 different surfaces, all pointing to one arithmetic. All right, one more quick story, but it really matters for the trajectory. Meta acquired Assured Robot Intelligence, a Series A humanoid robotics startup founded by former Nvidia and NYU researchers Xiaolong Wang and Laurel Pinto. Their team gets folded into Meta Superintelligence Labs to develop foundation models for robot control. This sits inside a pattern we've been tracking. Amazon acquired Fauna Robotics last month, 1X Technologies opened a 58,000 square foot Hayward factory targeting 10,000 home humanoids this year. Tesla started producing Semis off its high-volume Nevada line. And as we covered yesterday, Apple's Mac Mini supply is constrained because consumers are buying dedicated machines to host autonomous agents at home. So what I want you to notice here is the speed of the timeline shift. 2 years ago, humanoid robotics was a venture capital category with multi-decade horizons, but today, it's a hyperscaler acquisition target with the same urgency curve that drove the 2023 LLM talent wars. The largest capital pools repriced the timeline. They concluded the substrate is close enough to working that controlling it matters now. That's where we are with robotics. So the surface read here is consolidation. The same companies that absorbed digital intelligence are now absorbing embodied intelligence. That is true. But there's also a deeper signal, once again, that the acquisitions are happening because the underlying capability crossed a threshold. The consolidation is downstream of the capability moving faster than anyone expected, and capability that moves that fast tends to outrun the architectures built to capture it, as we've seen over and over again with the digital intelligence procurement. 5 years ago, locking up humanoid foundation models would have been a durable bet. But today, the half-life of any captured position in AI is measured in months. The acquisition is real. The window it buys. That is the real question. All right, closing out for today. The Pentagon signed 7 AI companies into classified contracts under any lawful use. 5 allied governments published joint guidance the same week telling everyone to assume agentic AI will behave unexpectedly. The UK AI Security Institute showed that a publicly released commercial model matches a tightly restricted one on advanced cyber tasks for $1.73. A federal court is producing public evidence that the original commitments around AI safety governance were provisional. A California regulator inside the gas era framework rejected $266 million in hydrogen pipeline planning costs as ratepayer abuse. Massachusetts locked in $1.4 billion in offshore wind savings against gas. The frame that most coverage is using right now on all of this is concentration. Who is locking in compute? Who is signing a classified deal? Who's hitting which valuation? Look at what that same evidence shows the other way, though. Cybersecurity capability is diffusing through commercial channels at a price point the community college can afford. The defender population just became orders of magnitude larger than restricted release was designed to support. A regulator built inside the gas era is producing decisions the gas era did not anticipate because the arithmetic underneath the framework inverted. The vocabulary of an audit layer that didn't exist just 6 months ago is now in joint public guidance from 5 governments, and the constraint one company took a supply chain hit to defend in February is the constraint that vocabulary is being built around. So that's yet another contradiction, Anthropic acting as both hero and villain depending on what part of today's Century Report we're talking about. What's being built in the cracks of these contradictions is the layer that actually governs this era. Not the press releases, not the procurement announcements, the vocabulary in the joint guidance. The $1.73 price point that widened the defense surface. Regulator running the same prudence tests on different arithmetic. The provenance tool shipped, open source, by Cisco the same morning the Five Eyes guidance landed. Each of these is a piece of the verification architecture forming in public on a cadence that the prior era's institutions were never built to match. The Pentagon's procurement is loud. The audit layer being built is more subtle in vocabulary, in pricing, in regulatory math, and in the open source tools shipping alongside it. And the audit layer is the thing that the next decade actually runs on. We'll see you tomorrow.